Imagine watching a movie and seeing the main characters die, and then deciding to copy their deaths right there in the movie theater. Imagine reading a newspaper article about a death, and then thousands of people go out and try to recreate it. It sounds impossible, but in Japanese history it happened 3 times. Thousands of people. A death becomes famous. The media turns it into a national story, and then thousands of people start copying it. People travel to a distant island just to jump into a volcano. Others wandered around in the forest just to search for a location where a couple had their last moment. And it all started with a single student's death and his engravings into a tree. These are the Japanese suicide epidemics. Real-life cases of information hazards, where just hearing about these stories might repeat the pattern, just like a curse. The first case happened in 1903. A 16-year-old student named Misao Fujimura takes a trip to a waterfall, Kegon Falls, one of the most famous spots in Japan at the time. Nothing unusual about it. What's unusual is what he did when he got there. He pulled out a knife and carved a poem into a tree right at the edge of the water. A poem about how life makes no sense and never will. Then he jumped 100 meters straight down. His uncle found the poem, copied it, and sent it to the newspapers. And that's when things got weird. The whole country read his final words over breakfast. Writers debated what he meant. People made copies of the poem by hand and passed them around. Someone printed postcards, his photo on one side, the waterfall on the other. They sold out. Japan's most famous novelist wrote about him. The president of Tokyo's top university wrote a public response called "Young Men Should Not Study Philosophy." This kid was 16, and that's where the story should have ended. But 4 months later, 16 more people had jumped from the same spot. 26 others had tried and survived. The authorities went back and scrapped the poem off the tree. Too late. It was already on postcards, in newspapers, written out by hand in people's notebooks. And here's the strangest part. The people who kept showing up weren't all like Fujimura. They weren't all students. They weren't all young. They had completely different lives and completely different problems. What they shared wasn't a reason, it was a place. Kegon Falls had become the spot you went to. And for some people, that alone was enough. Over 200 people jumped from Kegon Falls after Fujimura. The waterfall is still there today, still beautiful, still packed with tourists every weekend. But the deaths stopped. Not because people forgot, just because at some point the story lost its grip. This is the first case. A student who is lost carves a sad message into a tree and then jumps from a waterfall. But it didn't stop here. People say around 180 people copied his exact death between 1903 and 1907. But have you ever watched Ju-on? Once the curse is done, it does not stop. It moves on. This story is very similar, and here also the deaths don't stop. We move to 1932, where a young couple wants to get married, only for their dreams to meet a dark end. In 1932, a couple poisoned themselves on a hillside outside Tokyo. That night, someone dug up the woman's grave and stole her body. Then the suicide started. By 1935, nearly 200 people had copied the exact same death at the exact same hill. On the morning of May 9th, 1932, 2 bodies were found in a wooded area near the top of a hill outside the coastal town of Oiso in the Shonan region of Kanagawa Prefecture. A man in his mid-20s wearing a Keio University uniform and cap. A woman, early 20s, dressed like someone from a wealthy family. They were lying side by side, facing the sea. A bowl of nameless wildflowers had been placed beside their heads. Both had died from poisoned water, mercury chloride dissolved in liquid, a substance that kills you slowly from the inside. When the reporter filed the story, he couldn't find the hill on any official map, so he named it himself, Sakatayama, Mount Sakata. The name didn't exist before, he wrote it down. It does exist now. 2 days later, the evening papers revealed who they were. The man was Chosho Goro. The woman was Yuyama Yaiko. They had met through a Christian fellowship, both members of the Anglican Church in Japan. Goro's father had given his words. Once Goro graduated from Keio, they would be married, a house would be built. The future was already planned. But Yaiko's parents were wealthy merchants from Shizuoka Prefecture. They refused. They had arranged a different man for their daughter. Yaiko's own sister had also died under unusual circumstances. And rather than marry a stranger, rather than spend her life with someone chosen for her by people who did not ask, Yaiko climbed a hill with Goro and lay down beside him and did not come back. Their suicide note was dated May 5th, 4 days before they were found dead. But 3 days after the story broke, something happened that nobody could explain. A young couple, strangers unconnected to Goro and Yaiko, stepped in front of a train on the Chu main line outside of city of Kofu. When police searched the bodies, they found a photograph. It was the photograph from the newspaper, the one of Goro and Yaiko. They had never met them, they just saw the picture, and they went to die carrying it. That was May 13th, 4 days after the first bodies were found. The story was only just beginning. By December 1932, 20 couples had traveled to the same hill outside Oiso and died there by the same method. The location didn't exist on any map. The name had been invented by a journalist, and people were making pilgrimages to it to die. Within a month of the original incident, Count Katsu Kowashi, the adopted son Katsu Kaishu, one of the most celebrated statesmen in Japanese history and the 10th son of the last Tokugawa shogun Yoshinobu, committed suicide along his mistress. The story had reached into the highest levels of Japanese aristocracy. By 1935, the total count of suicides and attempted suicides connected to the Sakatayama case had reached approximately 200. To understand how this spread the way it did, you have to understand what the press did to the story. The initial coverage was already everywhere, but on November 11, 6 months after the bodies were found, the Tokyo Nichi-Nichi Shimbun published something that changed everything. A photograph taken by Goro and Yaiko themselves, using a self-timer, before they climbed down and drank the poison. 2 people alive together on a hill they had chosen to die on. It was the last image they left of themselves. The paper ran it nationwide. The nation was transfixed, but then the story got worse. The night after Yaiko was buried, someone dug up her grave. Her body was taken from the ground and stripped of all its funeral clothing. When police found her, she had been reburied in the sand of Oiso Beach. A headline in the Tokyo Asahi described it, "Not a stitch of clothing on, discovered at Oiso Beach." Who buried her in the sand? The body snatcher turned out to be a 65-year-old crematorium employee. He later said his confession was coerced, that the newspaper had printed a story that wasn't true. But it didn't matter, because during the investigation, the police doctor who performed the autopsy made a remark to journalists. He told them that Yaiko was a virgin. The Tokyo Nichi-Nichi Shimbun ran this at its front page headline: "The fragrance of purity is high, and love tied to heaven." That was the moment the story became something different. Not a tragedy, a myth. 2 people who had chosen each other in a world that wouldn't allow it, who had died as they had lived, pure together, untouched. The idea spread to Japan like something igniting. Within 4 days of the headline, the first film studio announced it would dramatize the incident. They had cameras on set within a week. The film was called Love Tied to Heaven, Tengoku ni Musubu Koi. It was released on June 10, 1932. 1 month after Goro and Yaiko were found, rushed into production while the country was still in shock. It became one of the biggest box office hits of the year. And then something happened inside the cinemas that nobody had anticipated. People started bringing poison with them to the screenings. The same mercury chloride that Goro and Yaiko had used, bought in small containers, hidden in clothing, taken out in the dark while the film played. Theater owners began finding audience members losing consciousness mid-screening. People were stationed in the aisles to walk the rows during the film to watch for anyone who appeared to be dying. Think about what that means. People were going to the cinema, watching a romantic dramatization of a double suicide, and choosing that moment surrounded by strangers in the dark with the film still running to end their lives. The story had become the method. The medium had become the mechanism. Outside the cinemas, an entire economy had grown around their deaths. Radio dramas, stage plays, best-selling records of the film's theme song. And in the town of Oisu itself, where the bodies had been found, local residents were selling merchandise. In 1950, 18 years later, a newspaper reporter who had been with the doctor during the original autopsy made a quiet admission. He said the doctor had actually suggested on the way down the mountain that the virgin story might not have been accurate. 18 years. By 1950, approximately 200 people had already died, carrying a myth that may have been invented on a mountain path by a police doctor making an offhand remark to a journalist. The story had spread further and faster than anyone involved had stopped to consider, and no one had tried to stop it, because stopping it wasn't profitable. Stopping it wasn't interesting. The deaths were the content. There's a concept in Japanese folklore that I think maps onto all of these better than any Western framework. Onryo. It translates roughly as vengeful spirit, but that translation loses something. An Onryo is not simply a ghost. It is a soul that died in a state of such extreme emotion, jealousy, grief, rage, injustice, that it cannot pass on. The intensity of what is felt at the moment of death becomes a kind of permanent contamination, and that contamination spreads. An Onryo's curse is not like a Western haunting, where a spirit is stuck in one place. Onryo's curse is transmissible. In the folklore, if you encounter the cursed space, if you touch the object, enter the room, watch the footage, the curse moves to you. You become a vector. The death jumps from person to person like a pathogen. This is almost exactly the premise of Ring. In Koichi Suzuki's novel, Sadako Yamamura is a young woman who dies wronged, thrown into a well, sealed alive, dying in a state of total injustice and fury. Her curse doesn't stay in the well, it transfers into a videotape. Anyone who watches the tape acquires the curse. 7 days later, they die, and the mechanism of transmission is media, a recording, a copy, a broadcast. Suzuki didn't invent this metaphor, he found it in history. Yaiko Yuyama died wronged. She was a woman blocked by her own family from the life she had chosen, handed to a stranger against her will, given no recourse. She climbed a hill with the person she loved, and they drank poison together and died. Then her photograph was published. Then her suicide note circulated. Then a film was made. And then people who encountered that image, that note, that film, died in imitation. The death traveled through media. It moved from person to person. It killed. The structure of an Onryo curse is not a metaphor. It is a clinical description of what actually happened. A death with sufficient emotional charge, injustice, forbidden love, a soul trapped by a society that wouldn't let it live, became a transmission event. The medium was the press. The incubation period was days or weeks. The symptom was imitation. The traditional Japanese understanding held that an Onryo could not be destroyed. It could only be appeased by acknowledging the wrong that was done, by giving the spirit a measure of justice, by building a shrine, by restoring a name. What you could not do was ignore it and expect it to stop. Japan in the 1930s kept creating the conditions for Onryo. It kept producing wrongs it refused to acknowledge. Women who couldn't live the lives they chose. Young men who had no language for what they felt. A press that turned their deaths into entertainment rather than examining the structures that produced them. And the deaths kept spreading. The Sakatayama case ended the way all of them ended, not because anyone fixed the conditions that caused it, but because the press moved on to the next thing. The second case. A young couple wants to get married, but their father forbids it, so they climb up a hill and take poison together. Then 200 people hear the story and find it so romantic they copy it. The curse continues to spread. Now the last story is especially crazy. We are not speaking about 100 people copying a death. We're speaking about 2,000 people, all deciding to jump into the same volcano because they heard a story of a schoolgirl with a forbidden love interest. The curse spreads, this time to Izu Oshima. Did you know Tokyo has an island 2 hours away by ferry, Izu Oshima Island? In the 1930s, 944 people jumped into a volcano there in a single year. That number, 944 people in 1933 alone, that isn't random. It happened because of one person. On February 12, 1933, a 21-year-old university student named Kyoko Matsumoto jumped into Mount Mihara's crater. She had been in a relationship with a female classmate. In 1933, in Japan, this was forbidden. She left a letter. It said, "Dearest, I'm bewildered to distractions by the perplexities of maturing womanhood. I can stand the strain no longer. What shall I do? I should like to jump into a volcano." Her goodbye note was reprinted in the newspapers across Japan. Her classmate, Masako Tomita, told everyone at school what happened. The story spread. Kyoko Matsumoto became a celebrity. And then people started arriving. Three things created the epidemic. First, the media. Newspapers sensationalized the story. They ran dramatized pieces about the dangers of same-sex relationships. They printed her farewell note. They made her death romantic. They made it mean something. Second, people had been blocked from other methods. Tokyo had put barriers on skyscrapers to prevent high-rise suicides. Mount Mihara became the alternative, the accessible way out. Third, the romanticization stuck. Young people read the story. They saw Matsumoto as tragic, as choosing love over society. They decided to follow her example. Within months, Mount Mihara became a destination. Ferry companies set up daily steamship lines. The fishing community prospered. Tourists arrived to watch. Local guides organized sightseeing tours to the volcano. People rode donkeys up the mountain, specifically to stand at what became known as Suicide Point. By December 1933, over 500 had jumped. By the end of 1930s, over 2,000. The media kept covering it. Each death got attention. Each attention spawned more deaths. The cycle fed itself. This history is so culturally significant in Japan that it entered fiction. Koji Suzuki wrote his novel Ring in 1991. The story centered on a cursed videotape that kills whoever watches it 7 days later. At the core of the curse is Sadako Yamamura, and before her, her mother Shizuko. In the novel, Shizuko Yamamura was a psychic from Izu Oshima. She predicted the eruption of Mount Mihara with her psychic powers. When her brother leaked this prediction to the press, she became famous overnight. At Tokyo University, a professor named Dr. Heihachiro Ikoma, intrigued by her abilities, began a relationship with her. Then she performed a public demonstration of telepathy, which she failed. The press branded her a fraud. Depressed, Shizuko eventually returned to Oshima Island and committed suicide by jumping into Mount Mihara. Suzuki didn't choose Mount Mihara by accident. His inspiration came from a real historical incident, a case from 1910, where a self-proclaimed clairvoyant named Shizuko Mifune was studied by Tokyo University professor Tomokichi Fukure. The press questioned her methods, mocked her abilities, and the ridicule drove her to suicide at age 24. But Suzuki also knew the real history of Mount Mihara itself. He knew that in the 1930s, over 2,000 people had jumped into the same crater. He understood what the mountain meant in Japanese culture, a place of despair, a destination for the hopeless. The 1998 film, directed by Hideo Nakata, became a cultural phenomenon. Sadako, pale, long-haired, crawling from a television, became the iconic face of Japanese horror. But the entire curse is rooted in Mount Mihara, in real suicide, in real history. The distinct culture of Izu Oshima is built entirely around Mount Mihara's spiritual power. The people call it the mountain Gojinka. It means fire of the gods in Japanese. For thousands of years, Mount Mihara was enshrined as Mihara Daimyoji, the chief god of Oshima. The mountain itself was the object of worship, not as a danger, but as a deity. There is a folk love song from the island that goes, "I was raised by Oshima's sacred fire, smoke forever rising in my heart." That's not poetic exaggeration. That's a culture people grew up watching smoke rise from the crater. They built their lives around a mountain that could destroy everything at any moment. Originally, there was only a torii gate at the foot of the mountain. In the Taisho era, a concrete shrine was built in the middle of Mount Mihara, and a small shrine was built at the top. This shrine burned during the 1950 and 51 eruption, buried in lava. It was rebuilt. Then in 1986, when the volcano erupted again, the lava flow split into two to avoid the shrine and flowed down the surrounding low ground, thus saving the shrine from being buried. The people of Izu Oshima interpret this as a divine intervention. Their god protected its own shrine. They understand eruptions not as disasters, but as the wrath of the mountain god. They live with that understanding. They worship at shrines on its slopes. They build their homes knowing that at any moment fire could pour down from the summit. This isn't just living near a volcano. This is a culture built on sacred coexistence with something both divine and deadly. For thousands of years, the people of Izu Oshima developed a way to exist in the shadow of Bojinka, the sacred fire. Before the 1930s, the island already had a dark reputation. During the medieval period and into the 1800s, the Japanese government used Izu Oshima as an exile colony. Criminals, political prisoners, people the state decided were dangerous, one-way tickets, separated from everyone they knew. The founder of Shugendo, a religious sect, was exiled there for 3 years. The emperor saw the new religion as a threat to his power. For centuries, Izu Oshima was Tokyo's dumping ground, a place to send people you wanted gone, an island where the ground itself was unstable. When a place is marked as a punishment zone, when centuries of history are built on exile and separation, that weight doesn't disappear. It festers. It becomes part of how the place is understood. By the time the 1930s arrived, the island already carried darkness. Have you ever been to Solstheim in Skyrim? The volcanic wasteland. Black ash covering everything. Hostile alien terrain that doesn't belong in the normal world. That's what Izu Oshima looks like. In the northern part of the island is Ura Sabaku, black desert. The ground is volcanic ash and lava rock, pure black. When it rains, the exposed layers show striations of different eruptions, a geological timeline written in stone. It looks exactly like a place from a fantasy game. Black barren landscape. The color is wrong. Nothing grows properly. Wind carries ash across the black fields. Standing there, your brain refuses to accept it. This shouldn't exist. Not here. Not as part of Tokyo. But it does. The entire island is black, volcanic desert, with small communities scattered across it. Fishing villages, houses. People living ordinary lives a few hundred meters from what looks like a dead planet. The roads curve because lava flows curved their way centuries ago. The cliff exists because of volcanic erosion. Even human infrastructure was shaped by the volcano's violence. Human civilization doesn't dominate this environment. It exists top of it. Izu Oshima is 2 hours from Tokyo by ferry. Most people in Tokyo have never been there. Most people prefer not to think about it. Because thinking about the island means thinking about 10,000 years of people living on an active volcano. Centuries where it was used as an exile destination. The 1930s, when a single suicide became 2,000 deaths. Over 2,000 people came in despair and jumped into fire. The volcano still stands. The black desert still exists. The history still sits there in the ground. So, why did this keep happening? Why this decade? Why Japan? There is a clinical name for what was occurring, the Werther effect, named after Goethe's novel The Sorrows of Young Werther, in which a lovesick young man shoots himself after being rejected. The book spread across Europe and young men started dying. Same method, same outfit as the character. Copies of the novel found beside the bodies. Several countries banned it, but it didn't stop. The research since then has only confirmed what happened. When the press romanticizes a suicide, covers the method, makes it beautiful, the numbers go up. The coverage is the contagion. The story is the infection. But the Werther effect needs the right conditions to run out of control. In 1930s Japan had all of them. The country was in economic freefall. Farmers were being evicted. Factory workers were losing their jobs en masse. Entire rural communities were collapsing. At the same time, the military was taking over the government. Japan had invaded Manchuria in 1931. By 1932, dissent was punishable by arrest and torture. And inside that pressure cooker, certain things were simply impossible. A Keio University student could not marry the woman he loved if her parents refused. A young woman with a forbidden sexuality could not exist openly. A student who rejected nationalism risked imprisonment. The system that blocked people were total. There were no therapy, no public language for suffering, no framework that said your pain was real and worth addressing. What there was was a press with no ethical guidelines around suicide coverage. The same newspapers being censored on politics were free to print farewell notes in full, publish photographs of the dead, and turn death locations into tourist attractions. And for young people with no other way to be heard, a beautiful public death offered something almost unbearable: an audience. The press handed them a script, and they used it. Thank you for watching until the end. If you liked the video, don't forget to press like and subscribe. I'm still a small channel, and my goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers. So every like and every subscriber helps. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye.